You know, when we think about building a city, our minds usually go to blueprints, stone and steel. But what about building a community, a real society founded not just on dirt and mud, but on faith, on brotherhood, and on a deep, profound sense of purpose? Well, today, we're going to explore the story of Al-Madeenah and see how the very first Islamic community was raised from the dust, truly built on a foundation of faith.
Right from the very start, the physical foundation was completely tied to a spiritual one. The first thing they built was a mosque, a house of worship. But you see, this wasn't just about putting up some walls. It was about forging a direct link between the people and God, making sure that foundation was built on piety from its very first day.
So, the first order of business in this new city was to build its heart, its central hub. And the story of how the ground for the Prophet's mosque was chosen, well, it tells you everything you need to know about the values this community would be built on.
So imagine the scene. The Prophet arrives in Al-Madeenah, riding his camel, and everyone is gathering around him, hoping he'll stay with them. But he just lets the camel wander, telling everyone it's under divine command. And where does it finally stop and kneel? A humble, dusty plot of land used for drying dates. That was it. That was the spot, chosen not by man, but by God's will.
Now, this divinely chosen piece of land wasn't just empty. It actually belonged to two young orphans, Sahel and Suhail. And they immediately offered it as a gift, but the Prophet refused. He absolutely insisted on paying the full price for it. And this first public act established a crucial principle: justice. The community's foundation would not be built by taking, even when something was freely offered. It was going to be built on fairness and respect, especially for the rights of the most vulnerable.
So, the land was secure. But now, how do you go about building a house of God? Do you go for the finest materials, the grandest designs? The answer, well, it really reveals the soul of this new community. This was not a project for hired contractors. No, this was a community effort, fueled by pure love and devotion. Everyone worked. The land was cleared of old ruins and trees. The Prophet himself was right there alongside them, striking the earth with a pickaxe to dig the foundation. The walls were made of simple mud bricks. The pillars were just palm trunks. And the roof? Woven palm branches. It was humble, it was simple, and it was built by the hands of the believers themselves.
And you have to understand, in doing this, they weren't just putting up a building. They were continuing a timeless, sacred tradition. Just like the Prophet Abraham had raised the foundations of the Kaaba centuries before, they too were raising a house for the worship of the one God. They were connecting their own struggle and their own effort to the very origins of their faith.
So the mosque itself was a powerful lesson in simplicity. But the Prophet's own home, which was built right beside it, set an even more profound and personal example for the entire community.
Let's just set the scene for a second. Al-Madeenah at that time, it wasn't some village of simple huts. Actually, quite the opposite. It was known for its tall buildings and its fortified castles. The wealthy clans would show off their power and status through their architecture, building these massive fortresses to protect their wealth and project their influence. And this contrast shows you everything. As the leader of this new state, the Prophet had access to its treasury. He could have easily built a palace. But instead, his family's home was made of the exact same simple materials as the mosque: clay, mud, and a low roof of palm branches. The message was unmistakable. True leadership isn't about worldly status or power. It's about humility and keeping your focus on the hereafter.
And that's the key, isn't it? This wasn't just his personal preference, like he was some kind of minimalist. It was a living, breathing lesson. His life was the curriculum. By choosing simplicity when he could have had luxury, he was providing the perfect example for his followers for all time.
Okay, so the physical center of the community is now established, but a new challenge comes up. How do you create a rhythm for the city? How do you unify an entire community for a common purpose, 5 times, every single day? Seriously, think about it. There are no clocks, no loudspeakers, no smartphones. People are busy in the market, they're at home, they're out in the fields. How do you get everyone to stop what they're doing and come together for prayer at the exact right time? So they brainstormed. A bunch of ideas were thrown around. Someone suggested raising a flag, but that's no good if someone's asleep or just not looking. Another suggested a fire, but that was rejected pretty quickly. A horn was suggested, which was similar to Jewish tradition, and a bell, like the Christians used, but the Prophet disliked both. The community was looking for a method that was uniquely and distinctly their own.
And the solution? Well, it didn't come from an instrument. It came from divine inspiration through a companion stream, the Adhaan, the call to prayer. And by rejecting flags and fires and horns and bells, the community embraced the most fundamental, most personal instrument of all, the human voice. It symbolized a direct, unmediated call from humanity to God, echoing through the city.
So the mosque was built, the call to prayer was established, but the true spirit of the community, that wasn't found in its walls or its sounds. It was in how it cared for its most vulnerable members.
In the very first sermon he delivered in Al-Madeenah, the Prophet set the tone for everything. He reminded the people that one day they would stand before God and be asked what good they sent ahead for themselves. And then he said this, "Protect yourself from the fire even if it's with just part of a date." The message was crystal clear. No act of charity is ever too small.
And this teaching, it became a physical reality. A part of the mosque, the northern section, was roofed over, and it became known as As-Sufa. This spot became a home for the poorest of the poor, the new migrants who had no family, no home, nothing. They were called the guests of Islam, and the entire community took responsibility for feeding and caring for them. The mosque wasn't just a place for prayer, it was a shelter, it was a school, it was a social safety net, it was compassion made real.
Ultimately, the story of Al-Madeenah is the story of a community that built its foundations on looking ahead. In that first sermon, this Quranic verse urged every single person to think about what deeds they were sending forward for the next life. From the fair purchase of that land, to the humble construction of the mosque, to the care for the needy, every single action was an investment in tomorrow. And it leaves us with a timeless question, doesn't it? What are we putting forth for our own?